Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Shalom. I'm David Mencer, Israeli government spokesman for the National Public Diplomacy Directorate in the Office of the Prime Minister. It's Monday, the 24th of February, day 507 since the start of the October 7th war. I'll provide a quick update from me and then we'll get straight to your questions. Please remember to put them in the chat together with your news outlet and your name, and we'll take a few. Firstly, on the testimony of our released hostages, let me share with you what they told us. Many were held in solitary confinement. Omer Shem Tov was held alone in tunnels for 450 days. Starvation and weight loss. Omer Wenkot lost more than 30 kilograms. That's 66 pounds in captivity. Omer was denied medical treatment for his chronic colitis. There was medical neglect and abuse. Eliyahu Cohen underwent surgery to remove bullets without anesthesia. He was chained by his hands and feet, causing physical injuries. The shackling and the physical restrictions, some were chained together for prolonged periods. Some of our hostages actually had to relearn how to walk shortly before their release. And as you can see with your own eyes, there was malnutrition. Hostages were given increased food only in portions in the weeks before, leading to their release to improve their appearance. There was the lack of basic hygiene, conditions unfit even for animals. Psychological deterioration. Hisham al-Said, an Israeli Arab Muslim, his father said of his son that he had returned unable to speak properly, that he had memory loss, and that he was in a severely weakened state. His father said of his son, he's not well, he's not in our world. A kind of Tarzan living for 10 years with animals, he does not communicate. We also know that multiple hostages, including Ori Danino, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, and others, were murdered in captivity. Then there is the strangulation of children. Our forensic evidence has showed that both Kfir, 9 months, and Ariel Bibas, 4, when they were taken hostage, were strangled to death in November 2023. Yesterday I heard the BBC's Sebastian Usher say live on air that they looked in good condition, our hostages, when they were released. Next, let me give you an update on the hostage release framework. Last Saturday, the 22nd of February, the 8th phase of the framework took place. 6 living civilians were released from captivity of Hamas terrorists to Israel. Omer Wenkert, Eliyahu Cohen, Tal Shoham, Omer Shem Tov, they were reunited with their families after 505 days in captivity. Hisham al-Said and Avira Mengistu were also released. They were too reunited with their families after a decade in captivity, 10 years in Hamas captivity. The government of Israel has made the decision that as a result of the repeated violations of the framework by Hamas, the release of convicted security prisoners from Israeli prisons has been delayed. Let me make this clear on behalf of the State of Israel. Israel will not overlook the inhumane, the degrading ceremonies that humiliate our hostages for propaganda. In addition, as you know, 4 murdered hostages were returned last week. The National Center for Forensic Medicine completed the identification of Kfir Bibas Silberman. Their scientific and forensic assessment was that Shiri and her children, Ariel 4 years old, and Kfir 10 months old, were murdered by their captors' bare hands in November 2023. Oded Livshitz, well into his 80s, was also murdered by Islamic Jihad terrorists. Next, here is an assessment of hostages remaining in captivity. 63 hostages remain hostage in Gaza. 60 are men, 3 are female. Israel's assessment is that 36 people have been murdered. Their bodies remain hostage. This includes Hadar Goldin, abducted in 2014. In the coming week, 4 deceased hostages are expected to return. Let me make the Israeli government's position clear. We will bring them all home, every single one of them. Lastly, on the operation against terrorism in northern Samaria, which has been expanded, dozens of terrorists have been eliminated, hundreds of wanted terrorists arrested, and multiple terror infrastructures attacked from the air and the ground. There will be no safe havens for terrorists in Judea and Samaria. Let me remind you that on Thursday, explosive charges were laid in multiple buses in Bat Yam in central Israel, some of which actually exploded. This is a serious terrorist event. Imagine what your country would do if multiple buses were exploded. Israel will not let this pass, and we will reach anyone who plans or tries to harm our citizens, wherever they are. Israel is well aware that the incessant incitement by Hamas and Iran and their attempt for more murderous violence against innocent civilians will not be tolerated. Israel says no. That's the end of our briefing here today. Please put your questions in the chat together with your name and news outlet, and we'll take a few right now. Okay, first question I can see here is from Jonathan Sasha Dotti, who is an independent journalist, and he asked, does the Prime Minister's office have a comment on the BBC's documentary which featured its presenter and narrator, the son of a Hamas minister, and also used non-sequential editing claiming to show events from one day which were clearly not filmed on the same day, particularly regarding the BBC's use of children in a documentary who were clearly groomed and scripted by Hamas. Thank you for that question, Jonathan. Let me take this opportunity to pay tribute to the work of independent journalists like Jonathan Sashadotti, like David Collier, who do not have the resources of a huge media organization behind them, yet at the same time expose the lies and the blatant half-truths as told by media mammoths like the BBC. Let me spell out the BBC's systematic failures, from airing Hamas propaganda disguised as children's testimonies to actually whitewashing Hamas as anything other than what it actually is, a terrorist group. All of these points to one disturbing conclusion, that the BBC is actively shaping the narrative to undermine Israel and to embolden Hamas. Our Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell, has said as much in interviews over the last few days. What the BBC are doing is they are amplifying Hamas's voices while censoring Israeli suffering, giving airtime to the children of Hamas operatives while neglecting the horrific testimonies of Israeli hostages. As I mentioned earlier in this briefing, yesterday, the BBC Sebastian Usher actually had the audacity to say that the released hostages looked in good condition. So the BBC spreading Hamas's disinformation, as seen very early on in this war with the Ali hospital lie, which failed to retract with the same prominence as which they spread the lie. They refused to call Hamas a terrorist organization, a term which is actually recognized by their own government, while portraying Israel's defensive actions as a war crime. They frame Hamas's actions and Israel's defense as morally equivalent, legitimizing terror as a valid resistance. The pattern is clear. The BBC's reporting doesn't just misinform, it serves Hamas's interests. By obscuring the truth, the BBC shields Hamas from accountability and supports its goal of Israel's destruction. I've seen this many, many times, and it's very clear to many people, to I think the majority of Israelis. Even when I have personally been interviewed on days where our hostages have been released, looking, unfortunately, you're left with no other impression that they have just been released from a concentration camp. Rather than them wanting to talk about that, they prefer, BBC said to me that they wanted to talk about UNRWA. They wanted to that was what they wanted to talk about on the day our hostages were released. We understand very, very clearly what the BBC's agenda is. We know that they are funded by the taxpayer in the UK. That's British people's hard-earned money being used to finance the spreading of Hamas propaganda, and they should be ashamed of themselves. They are failing in their duty to be impartial, and they are failing in their duty to give the real news rather than news which is tainted by their own willingness to see Israel damaged in the public arena. Okay, next question here is from Nick Robertson from CNN. And your question is, in the post-October 7th environment, the government is being accused by members of Knesset and journalists and many others of limiting some freedom of speech. Are you okay? And do you plan, as they fear, to increase controls on freedom of speech? And that's a question from Nick Robertson. Thank you for that question, Nick Robertson of CNN. I noticed that you tweeted today or yesterday, you gave an equivalence between our hostages being released and on the other side, Palestinian convicted criminals, terrorists, people with blood on their hands being released. There is no equivalence. But let me get straight to your question on press freedoms in Israel. To be frank, Nick, Israel treasures its democratic values. Israel remains a democracy that values free speech. There will always be national security concerns, of course, as they are in all countries, especially at a time of war, and as other countries at war have found. But Israel will always ensure that speech does not incite violence or support terrorist organizations. Yes, of course, we will maintain freedom of speech under the rule of law, so any measures which are taken are always taken within the framework of Israeli law with all the appropriate checks and balances from our democracy. In Israel, there is a distinction between criticism and incitement. Criticism of the government will never be silenced. Just one, half a minute of exposure to Israel's vibrant media will make that crystal clear that criticism of the government in our media and international media will never be silenced, but we will not tolerate calls for violence or the glorification of terror. That is, I think, in sync with almost every other democracy in the civilized world. Yes, of course, freedom of speech is enshrined. Excuse me, we're just having an issue here. We'll try and get that fixed. Okay. Let me, as we try and get that stopped, let me try and carry on here. Okay, Nick, I think that answered your question. Next question from Joel Pollack at Breitbart News. Is there any prospect for Palestinian self-governance given the fact of terror in the West Bank and Gaza? Why not just tell the world that the project of Palestinian statehood has failed? Thank you for that question, Joel. Joel Pollock of Breitbart News. Let me answer that question this way. The Palestinians have been offered an opportunity for a state many, many times in our recent history. And let me make this clear. A Palestinian state, it is clear now from the leadership of the Palestinian Authority and other Palestinian leaders that they want a state in place of Israel rather than living alongside Israel. And also that a Palestinian state, which is just a precursor to try another method to destroy this country, Israel will, of course, never tolerate such an opportunity, such a situation. So I think that any Palestinian state right now will be seen as a reward for terrorism, and Israel, of course, cannot allow that to happen. Yes, of course, Israel's people and Israel's government are constantly searching for ways to live in peace with our neighbors, with all of our neighbors in this region. Of course, the way we say hello and goodbye is the word shalom, which actually means peace. Peace is always first and foremost our default objective, but a state which is merely a precursor, another opportunity, or just another step to trying to destroy Israel, no country would put up with that, and Israel is no different. And of that, there is wall-to-wall support here in Israel. Okay, let me take a final question here from Alexander Cornwell from Reuters. Under what circumstances will Israel release the 600 plus Palestinian prisoners that were expected to be released this past weekend? And is that handover ceremony, is it that the handover ceremonies need to be stopped, or are there other requirements in addition to this? And you've also asked, who does Israel believe is behind the bomb plot in Bat Yam last Thursday? On this, let me just, Alexander, let me just answer your question in this way, because there's a lot of equivalence being put in the international media about Palestinians, convicted terrorists being released, and our hostages. And I mentioned to you before that Nick Robertson of CNN compared in his tweet, just I think today or yesterday, that 6 Israeli hostages have been released, and then he wrote that 600 Palestinians in exchange were not. Let me tell you some of who these terrorists are. For instance, one of them is Bilal Abu Ghanem. On October 13th in 2015, he was behind a bus attack. He carried out the bus attack. It was bus number 78. It was in Jerusalem's Armon HaNatziv neighborhood. This is what he did, this terrorist. He used a pistol to shoot at the passengers. That's one of the terrorists. Or how about Omar Al-Zaban? He is a senior commander in the Al-Qassam Brigade. He was involved in attacks that resulted in the deaths of 27 Israelis. 27 Israelis he killed. For that, he was sentenced to 27 life terms, plus an additional 25 years. He's been in custody since 1998. Some of his attacks have been, for instance, the 1997 Machane Yehuda market bombing. Al-Zaban was also involved in suicide bombings at Jerusalem's Machane Yehuda market in 97, as I said, which resulted in 16 fatalities. Also on Ben Yehuda Street, the bombing in Tel Aviv, he participated and planned the execution of a triple suicide bombing on Jerusalem's Ben Yehuda Street, which killed 5 people and injured nearly 200. Let me share with you some of the victims, because the international media tends to talk about these Palestinian prisoners, who they're called. They are convicted terrorists. Let me talk about some of their victims of that particular Ben Yehuda Street bombing in Jerusalem. Among them was 5 fatalities. One of them was a 14-year-old boy. His name was Yael Botvin. Yael Botvin. She was celebrating admission to a particular high school at the time of the attack. She was very excited about that Let me tell you about another of these terrorists being released or want to be released. What about Nael Barghouti? He was first arrested in 1978. He was arrested at 20 years old and he was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 18 years. He was freed after 33 years in another prisoner swap, but of course he went back to terrorism, as many of these terrorists do. He was rearrested for planning more terror attacks. Then he was sentenced to 14 months. Or what about Othman Bilal? He was responsible for the Ramat Gan bus bombing on a crowded number 20 commuter bus on July 24th, 1995. 6 Israelis were killed in that attack and 33 were wounded. The bomb contained 15 kilograms, that's 33 pounds of TNT, packed with nails into a metal pipe. Who were his victims? Let me tell you. They were Moshe Shkedi, he was 75, from Ramat Gan. Or Rachel Tamari was 65 from Tel Aviv. Or Zvia Cohen was 62, also from Tel Aviv. Or Zahava Oren was 60 of Tel Aviv. Or Nechama Lubavitz, who was 61 from Tel Aviv. Or Mordechai Tovia, 37. So when international media say, hey, why haven't you released these 600 prisoners? They are terrorists with blood on their hand. Unfortunately, our intelligence says that many of them will go back to reoffend, but our objective now is to bring our hostages home. It always has been, and this is the very painful price which we will pay, and our Prime Minister and the government has confirmed that these will be temporarily delayed because of the outrageous, the inhumane treatment which our hostages have been released with dreadful propaganda ceremonies. For heaven's sake, using babies' bodies as a propaganda tool is outrageous. Okay, another question here from Fredaga. Times of Israel has reported that Israel's offered to free prisoners if Hamas releases 4 bodies today without a ceremony. What is Hamas's response so far? Any update regarding this offer? Thank you for that question, Fred. I referred to the expectation of four bodies of being released this Saturday, and earlier in my briefing I haven't got anything further to add on that. Natalie Meltzer, Natalie, if you could give your news outlet, then I can take your question. Nuria from FA, the Spanish news agency. What did Netanyahu mean yesterday when he said that he will not allow Syrian forces into southern Damascus? I haven't got any information on that, Nuria. What I can tell you on Syria is that we won't let Syria again become a staging ground for attacks against us. Our forces will remain in key positions along our border with Syria for as long as necessary to protect our security. Question from Jodie Cohen at Newsmax. According to reports, if Hamas release 4 dead hostages today without demeaning ceremony, Israel will release 600 security prisoners. Have you had any indication from Hamas about that? Thank you for that question, Jodie. I've spoken about this already, and I haven't got anything further to add. And question from Hannah Julian from the Jewish Press regarding Steve Witkoff travelling to the region to resume talks on Phase 2. Does Israel intend to proceed with Phase 2 given Hamas's demands for a complete withdrawal from Gaza and its intention to resume governing the enclave to release any more hostages? Thank you for that question, Hannah. Look, on this, let me just restate Israel's war aims, our goals in this war, which have been clear since the October 7th, when Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre on Jews since the Holocaust, because you ask if Israel is prepared to allow Hamas to remain in power. Let me make this crystal clear. As we have said almost daily, 507 days ago, our objectives in this war are to destroy Hamas's governing and military capability. The Prime Minister has made clear there is no scenario of Hamas remaining in power. These are the Prime Minister's words in Gaza. There is no scenario. Of course, the release of all of our hostages and ensuring that Gaza does not become a threat to Israel again. These remain our war aims in this war. The Prime Minister and the President and Steve Witkoff have spoken about these regularly. And let me tell you, Jody, we are in full cooperation with our US allies. There is no daylight between Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. We are working together on our hostages as well. We will not rest until we get them all out. Natalie Meltzer from the Associated Press. Could you just pop up for a second? Just go up a bit. Can I see your Natalie Meltzer? Just go up a bit. Just go up a bit. Until we find. Okay. Here's your question, Natalie Meltzer from the Associated Press. Can I comment on the Interior Minister's decision to deny entry to European Parliament member due to land in Israel? I haven't got any information on that whatsoever. Natalie, thank you for that question. And then there's one more question here I'll take here from Matthew Doran from ABC. You're asking about phase 2 talks or the extension of phase first stage of the ceasefire hostage framework. Look, these discussions on a permanent ceasefire, let me share this with you. With our US partners, they've been ongoing. The reality is that these discussions have never really ended. We understand that these discussions are difficult. We are dealing with a genocidal, murderous organization. Does anyone need any convincing of that fact? That uses babies as bargaining chips, dead babies as bargaining chips. But we are committed to getting all of our hostages home and also achieving the other war aims. And we will not end this war until all of our goals are met. And of course, as for our ultimate goal, I can tell ABC in Australia, it is of course a permanent ceasefire, but Hamas must not be in power. Gaza must be demilitarized and de-radicalized. Okay, thank you. That's the last question we've got here. Thank you for joining us here today. We're available in the usual way. And in the meantime, please do stay safe. We'll have another briefing for you again, no doubt. And in the meantime, please do stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Djobnik signing off.